fact that, and you're probably aware of this, many astronauts realize when they see how thin that atmosphere is, and you realize there's no borders on any of those countries down there, and it brings together this unity that I'm very optimistic about. We got rough water between now and whenever that happens, but I think I'm feeling like the needle is moving very strongly in that direction.
Well, I'm all about that. I really think that's a great message. And I suggest, and I can put this in the show notes too, for anyone out there to check out on YouTube, Carl Sagan's The Pale Blue Dot. That is such a great message. And, there's unity in that. And, like Reagan used to say, how we'd come together if we were attacked from an alien, source. Also, this just touched down a few minutes ago was the rescue basically of those two astronauts. And, you look when they came into the capsule, and of course the Russian guy came in an alien mask. That was pretty funny. But I mean, what unity? It's a great, there's all these countries and we're all unified. We can all agree, this is all we have, and it's a shame that we're always at odds and tribal and whatever we do. But shift gears. Well, before I do, we have, I think we're going to have a lot of questions coming in here. Sure. So right here is a question from Chris. How close would all those galaxies be to us and each other if there were no empty space in between? Do they travel by reimagining the vacuum of space? Chris always has some pretty good questions.
What a magnificent question. Thank you, Chris. That's fabulous. I like to talk about one of my buddies. He was a starman at West Point, a chemistry professor. And he used to take his class out to a football field. He was teaching Alabama. And he would put a golf ball and a tennis ball down on the 50-yard line in the middle of the football stadium. And so he would ask his students, okay, where's the first shell? So a helium atom, right? Two electrons whirling in the shell. Where do you think the shell is? And the kids are like, I don't know, maybe the end zone, maybe up there in the box seats or whatever. And he's like, oh no, it's downtown. That's how expansive.
You don't wake up dreaming of McDonald's fries. You wake up dreaming of McDonald's hash browns. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Welcome to where the 5 to 9 more than makes up for the 9 to 5. Where you check your worries the moment you walk in. Where every day feels lucky, even at night. Welcome to the chance to savor every moment, every time you're here. For 50 years and counting, we've delivered legendary Boyd hospitality. So join us for our 50th anniversary with special celebrations all year long. Welcome to Boyd Casinos. Welcome to where you want to be.
This atom is. And then, these are high school kids, but then he would go into, now inside the golf ball, now we know there are subatomic particles, quarks, and so it's clear that the vast majority of all this, solid stuff that we have really is space. It's just open realm.
Isn't it true that we would sit on the head of a pin if we had all the space of a human? I've heard something like that.
Oh, yeah.
We'd be so tiny if all the space was, if we were compacted down.
Yeah.
And, the black hole thing is really amazing how that gets down.
It is. It's absolutely fascinating. And so in that context of reimagining space and so forth, I'll just point out that Chuck Yeager, broke the sound barrier in 1947. Really interesting year, right? 1947. All of a sudden, after demobilizing after every previous war, we have a permanent Department of Defense. 2 years after, World War II is pieces broken out all over. Kind of weird, right? 1947, Kenneth Arnold sees flying saucers over Mount Rainier, right? 1947, you have Roswell. 1947, the National Security Act creates the special access programs. The magnitude of that impact I cannot overstate. You, as a private, could suddenly tell a 4-star general, I'm sorry, sir, you don't have a need to know what's behind this door. And so the magnitude and the corrosive impact that had on military cohesion, I just can't begin. But so Yeager wrote the Soundbury that year, and so there were many scientists all stacked up. It's impossible, not going to happen. His aircraft is going to explode, or he's just never going to get past it. And the fascinating thing is, after he got on the other side, it smoothed out, right? After you get through that shockwave, you get into a bit of it's not laminar, but so anyway, I asked whether or not that lies in our future with regards to FTL, faster than light travel, because here we have the naysayers. Nope, can't happen. But it's an interpretation of laws of physics that are made to be broken. So
right, and I mean, I've said this. I think I said this a week ago or whatever. But we always think we're at the pinnacle, of intelligence, and it's not so. And there are so many things that could still be discovered in physics that we don't know today. And there's so many people that are pretty arrogant about thinking there's nowhere to go. But there's definitely things. It's almost like back engineering. If whatever it is here, how did they get here?
Right.
That type of thing.
And so you and I were talking a little bit earlier about the role of ego, right? And how, especially with secrets, right? If somebody tells you, if I told you, hey, Martin, don't tell anybody else this, you can't avoid it. Neurologically, you're going to get a dopamine hit from that, just like clickbait, just like all the other sources of serotonin flow and neurotransmitters and so forth. So secrets inflate your ego. And the more secrets you get, the more arrogant you become. It's just an inherent aspect of that community. And so it's always a balance game. As I mentioned to you, in the special mission unit world, we are notoriously tough on ourselves and taking down each other's egos. It's a really important aspect of it, because if you don't do that, there's always a bigger bully on the block than you, and so you have to be brutally honest with yourself and with your colleagues when you do that. So it's an inherent aspect, but the entire government doesn't do that. A lot of us, the inflation just goes in one direction, and very rarely do you get a pin pop the balloon, or do you let any gas out of the balloon? So it's a real problem in this realm, and I think part of survival, as we talked about, you got to have a big ego to rush in that building that's on fire. You have to have a lot of faith and confidence in your own athleticism. Never mind, the firefighter calendar with all these guys, right, and gals. But you have to have faith in your equipment, you have to have faith in your training, etc., to take that risk. And so it's a really difficult balance, to maintain, right? That you have this arrogance that drives you to publish that paper when everybody else is saying no, it's impossible. Mm-hmm. And so there's academic arrogance, there's athletic arrogance, there's human arrogance, and so it's a fine line to strike. And I've failed on both sides of that equation many times. But we got to keep driving forward, and I still have enormous faith and confidence in humanity that we'll overcome that and keep climbing. And just we got to stretch ourselves.
Yeah. I have to ask you this because I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface. I know it's your birthday, but do you mind going a little bit longer than the hour?
Sure.
Like you said, you celebrated your birthday, so now it's like this is your birth certificate day.
Yeah.
But that'd be great. Because I want to get to some other things I heard you talk about.
Sure.
on another podcast that I thought was very interesting eventually. And there are people asking questions that I see that kind of relate to that as well. Whenever we get into that part of the topic, but just a little bit before that though, how would you, as far as you looking at this subject, how would you say that your science background helps you look a little different than the average person?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's kind of rare, I used to joke, I went back to graduate school. Well, first time I went back to graduate school, I think I was in my 30s, early 30s, which is fairly typical. No, actually, it's not that typical. Nowadays, a lot of folks that pursue a PhD go straight through. So you go from high school, you're at the top of your class in high school, and then you excel and you get your bachelor's degree, and then you go on from there to get a master's degree and a PhD, and then you come back and you're a professor. And so there's a large portion of academia that takes that track. And I used to joke when I went back to grad school, on your taxpayer dollars, by the way, thank you very much. You sent me to school 3 times with your taxpayer dollars. So that's why I always say, I've been overpaid as a military guy. A lot of folks have not been paid enough for the risk that they've taken, but I was overpaid. So the second time I went back, I was in my 50s, and these kids are in class with me, and they're my daughter's age. Mm-hmm. And I used to joke with them, we'd go have Friday happy hour and have a couple of beers and gossip about professors and so forth. And those professors were younger than me too, like by 20 years. And so it was a great time. And I used to call them 23rd graders, right? Because they just went straight through all the way from 12th grade all the way up. And so, it's a little bit of a jab, and then they would pick on me and my lack of memory, right? Because you're getting too old, you're getting senile, you can't remember times tables. Oh yeah? And how come I got a 98 on that test and you get a 95 on? So we go back. It was wonderful. It's the jocular aspect of camaraderie that you get, right? But our academic system is still sort of pushing that, and it bothers me a little bit that we don't give enough room to explore. And I saw this, not to pick on Florida. I spent 3 wonderful years down there with my daughters, but there was a lot of pressure when they were playing travel softball to not play any other sports, because their coaches wanted them full-time focused on softball. And I'm like, wait a minute. Cross training is a huge benefactor for a well-rounded athlete.
Yeah.
And so there's such a pressure to excel early and make your name early that we don't give enough room to do the pinball thing. And I was just enormously fortunate, especially going to West Point. We didn't even, in my year, I graduated in 81, and I think for another 2 more years after that, the United States Military Academy did not allow you.
You don't wake up dreaming of McDonald's fries. You wake up dreaming of McDonald's hash browns. McDonald's breakfast comes first. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
Looking for a fun street safety assembly for your child's school? With free swag for students? Schedule a Beat the Street assembly from Safe Routes Utah. Visit utahbts.com to schedule your school today.
To have a major. It says right on my transcripts, no major. Huh. And so it was a really clever way to make sure that the Army retained you, right? Because you're not going to get some specialty. And after you do your 5 years, you're going to go out and be an oceanographer like Tim Gallaudet, right? Screw that.
Yeah.
You're going to stay in because you don't have a specialty.
Yeah.
So it was a really clever way. And they eventually overcame it, and they realized the value of, focusing on one area or another. But I was afforded the opportunity to bounce around from civil engineering to AI and computer science. I took my first computer science class at the academy. It was punch cards. And the
Ah,
worst thing you could do was like, I used to spill somebody's books. Worst thing you could do is spill somebody's punch cards. It was horrible. You got to get them this stack like this big. So anyway,
but we better explain what those are. This is you picture the great big IBM, computers with the spinning, wheels, and the punch cards. That was what the way it was. And
so it's kind of like on Wall Street when they count the dollar bills. They don't do that anymore. Of course, everything's electronic now.
Yeah.
But the bill counters, you would have a computer that would read those cards. It'd filter in their little punch holes, little chads. In fact, they were used in voting, for a time. So I guess I was kind of antiquated, even going to graduate school the first time to study computer science and AI and robotics. And so that was a sort of a right-hand turn away from engineering. There was still some commonality in engineering with robots, right? But it was so much more. You get electrical, you got software, you got sensing, all those things. And then I ended up going back to study cognitive neuroscience because I wanted to look at the way the human brain reacted when I was trying to control a robot, supervise a robot. And so I had the freedom to do that was given to me by the Department of Defense. And I was enormously fortunate. But the vast majority of folks that get into higher education, they're in the meat grinder, right? You will stay, and you do have to focus. I was like a kid in a candy store. I want to take this course and that course and this course and that course. And my advisor was like, look, you can, because Uncle Sam's paying for it, but you ain't never going to graduate, bro. You got to focus. And so they got to keep you on track. So it's a challenge. And I think it serves to limit us to a certain extent because, and what's also unfortunate about that is I think when you look at the origins or the basis for innovation, what you see is these obtuse, almost orthogonal fields that you think are orthogonal, but they're really not. They're not as different as you think, like music and mathematics. One of my favorite bars of all time is in Fort Collins called Avogadro's Number. Huh. And the gal, I forget the name of the band, and I probably shouldn't, support them or do any sort of economic support. But she was a theoretical physicist. She was a mathematician. And so the overlap between what she was doing playing and she could master multiple instruments. So from music and maybe creativity in terms of art or whatever, and then you feed that back into science, then you have the breakthrough. A lot of people have these enormous breakthroughs when they're sleeping or in the shower and they're not thinking about what the main problem is. And you get this obtuse input in there. So the more we focus, the more we lose in terms of potential for innovation. So I'm really worried about that. And that circles back around to this arrogance that you stay in your narrow little lane and you don't take advantage of these other sources of information. And again, circling this back one more lap, internet. That's what's wonderful about the internet, because you got to focus, right? If you get in there and you just start following any YouTube clip that you want, you can really get yourself out. So it's a balance. And that's why I remain very optimistic about where we're going, despite our academic or not our anthropomorphic arrogance.
Mm-hmm. I have to say my career, what I do, appraisals, I'm what's called a generalist. I'm not a specialist, and they're so rare today. You can't find a generalist. So I'm very busy. I'm going in different places in the country, and I mentioned before that I appraised, Merv Griffin's estate, all his things, and other, celebrities and things like that. So I've been really lucky when it comes to that. But that's because I have a general knowledge that I never specialized in silver or art or, ephemera documents, things like that. But I loved them all.
Yeah. And I love what you just said too, because that's another source of optimism. because look at when you and I were growing up, traveling to another state. Especially in Boston, we used to call it the force field. Can't leave the force field. Can't leave the Boston area. If you go out to Western Massachusetts, ooh man, that's a big vacation there. But now, I see kids on airplanes all the time. And just that exposure to a different culture added on to, traveling by the internet, again, gives me hope and optimism for the way forward.
I think I heard my Bostonian girlfriend laughing in the background.
I love it. Yeah, is she sitting in the car back there?
No, she's in the other room, but anyway, yeah. So so I'd like to shift gears a little bit, if I could, just because a lot of people want you to talk about this, but I do believe it sounded like a lucid dream you were talking about. Was it a dream or this encounter? You seemed like you weren't quite sure whether you had an encounter or you did have an encounter. Unless I misheard that in the podcast. Can we talk about that at all?
Are you talking about the podcast with Ross
Jesse
Michaels?
Yes.
Oh,
yeah.
So I felt a little bit more relaxed with Jesse, and I was free to speculate. And I didn't want to dive too much into sharpened memories under hypnosis until we sort of established. Again, hypnosis is part of this intersection of the scientific literature with the woo-woo literature, and now it's well established the value of hypnosis and how effective it is, and a lot of it's because we have the tools now to evaluate it. Turn of the century, EEG, it had been around, but it wasn't prevalent. And it wasn't like those 5 sets that I have up on top of that bookshelf over there that are wireless. And so now I can monitor brainwaves driving to work, driving to school, whatever it happens to be. So through neurological tools like fMRI, like a wide variety of tools, MEG, all these mechanisms, we now know that hypnosis is quite valid, and it's very, very effective in helping grab and stitch together the cortical pathways that are inherent in memory consolidation.